The Legend of Timothy. It was Halloween time on the island of Sodor. All of the engines loved the spooky time of the year, seeing all the children dressed up as ghosts, witches, skeletons, and more. Besides seeing the children dressed up in their Halloween costumes, all the engines gather around at Tidmouth every year to hear some of Edward's spooky stories. This gives some of the engines shivers each Halloween, such as Oliver, Thomas, and Percy. One night at Vicarstown, Thomas, Percy, and James had to shunt some goods trains for Old Bailey. Thomas was exhausted. "Bust my buffers! Why do we have to shunt these cars? We should be at the Halloween party by now," Thomas said to Percy. Percy was a little surprised hearing from what Thomas had to say. "Well, Thomas," Percy said in defense, "the Halloween party ended a while ago. And besides," Percy added, "we have to be a really useful engine, plus we're helping out Old Bailey." Percy said to his friend Thomas. Thomas looked down at his buffers, feeling a little ashamed of what he had said. Thomas sighed. "Oh, Percy, I suppose you're right. We are helping out a friend in need after all," Thomas said to Percy. However, out of the three engines, James groaned the most. James shunted his cars properly into place. "A splendid red engine like me shouldn't be shunting filthy coal cars. I should be pulling coaches," James said to both Thomas and Percy crossly. Percy rolled his eyes at James. "Oh, James, come on. We know you like to shunt coaches, but we are being really useful engines helping out Old Bailey," Percy said to James. Thomas agreed with his friend Percy. "Percy, you're right. Yeah, and James, we are helping out Old Bailey. If you're going to continue to be like this, me and Percy will just go back to the sheds," Thomas said to James, trying to defend Old Bailey, of course. Percy agreed with Thomas. "Yeah, Thomas, I agree with you. Come on, let's go back to the sheds." As Percy was just about to leave, alongside Thomas, an idea flew into James's funnel. "Wait, Thomas and Percy, don't leave. I have something I want to tell you both," James said in a sneaky tone to Thomas and Percy. Thomas and Percy were both surprised. Thomas spoke first. What is it, James?" Thomas said curiously. "Yeah," Percy added. "What is it?" Percy said to James, as James spoke in a small, spooky voice. "Would you two like to hear a scary story?" James said to both Thomas and Percy. Percy was a little bit scared. Sure, James. Is it like one of Edward's stories?" Percy said nervously. Thomas chuckled. "Ha! Oh, Percy, I understand you get a little scared, but I like to hear a scary story. After all, James may have a good one to tell, just like how Edward does every Halloween." Percy smiled a little bit to his best friend. "Oh, Thomas, I suppose you're right," Percy said calmly. "Well," James said, "this story is about an engine who looks just like you, Thomas, named Timothy," James said to Thomas. "Timothy?" Thomas said in confusion. Is he like that oil-burning engine at the Sodor China Clay Works?" Thomas said in confusion. No, James said to Thomas. This Timothy was a very different kind of Timothy. He was silver, with the number 0 painted on his sides. And he did look a lot like you, Thomas. Now, James said, on to the story. As Thomas and Percy both backed up to James to hear the story of Timothy, James made sure both his friends were ready to listen. A long time ago, James said, there was the engine named Timothy. He looked like you, Thomas, just with the 0 painted on his sides. He was one of the first engines to arrive on the island. However, something dark happened one fateful night. One night, a very long time ago, it was raining, and he was going as fast as he can towards a viaduct. However, he didn't stop in time, and he, along with his passengers, plunged off the viaduct, never to be seen again. Legend has it, every Halloween, he haunts looking for an engine to try and scare every Halloween, James told to Thomas and Percy. Thomas and Percy both shivered a little. Percy shivered especially. Ooh, that story was scary, Percy said nervously. Thomas couldn't agree more, as he shivered as well. You're right, Percy. That story was scary. And James, that was a very good story. However, Thomas said, us engines would never do harm like that to our passengers, Thomas said to James. Indeed, Thomas and Percy, James said respectively. But before James could finish, Percy spoke. Come on, you guys. It's time we get some sleep. I have to take the early morning mail train tomorrow, Percy said to his friends Thomas and James. And so, like that, Thomas, Percy, and James made their way back to the sheds. But what the 3 engines didn't know was that Diesel was nearby. He had overheard James's story about Timothy, and he began to make a plan to scare Thomas. Early the next morning, at Knapford Station, Thomas was taking an early morning passenger run to Farquhar Station on his branch line. However, he couldn't get much sleep the night before after hearing James's story about Timothy. Just then, he heard a familiar whistle. It was Edward. He was dropping off passengers after doing some passenger runs at Brendam Docks. Edward could see that Thomas looked scared. He decided to find out why. Good morning, Thomas, said Edward cheerfully. Why do you look so scared? It's a beautiful day after all, Edward said to his friend. Thomas took a small puff. Well, you see, Edward, last night, when me, Percy, and James were on the mainland, we had to shunt some goods trains for Old Bailey, and James told me this story about Timothy the ghost engine, Thomas said to Edward. And so, Thomas told Edward the whole story about what James had told him the night before regarding Timothy. Edward, after hearing the story, had some wise words for his friend. Well, Thomas, he said, I don't think another engine named Timothy that looks like you lives on our railway. The only one I know who does is Timothy the oil-burning engine at the Sodor China Clay Works, who works with Bill and Ben, Edward said to Thomas. Then, the guard's whistle blew for Edward to go. "Well, Thomas, I'd like to stay in Chattel Day, but I have to take these passengers to another part of my branch line. I'll see you later," said Edward. And with that, Edward left. After Edward had gone, that's when the guard blew his whistle for Thomas to go. Annie was a little concerned. "Come on, Thomas," said Annie. "We mustn't be late," Annie told Thomas. Thomas was a little surprised. "Oh, right, Annie," Thomas said nervously. And so the guard blew his whistle, and Thomas chuffed on his way. After Thomas had gone, what Thomas didn't know was that Diesel was nearby. Diesel snickered quietly. "So, that red engine James told that stinky steamy Percy and Thomas about the ghost engine Timothy?" Diesel snickered, as he grinned as well. "I'm gonna give Thomas the best Halloween scare that he'll never forget," Diesel said, as Diesel oiled away to begin making his plan. That evening, after a long and hard day's work on his branch line, plus also helping out Percy earlier with the mail, Thomas arrived at the shunting yard to take some trucks to the quarry on his branch line. But what Thomas didn't realize was that Diesel was in the shunting yard too. He hid himself behind the trucks to give Thomas the best scare that he planned out all evening. Thomas was coupled up to the trucks. "Okay," said Thomas, "time to take these trucks for the quarry for Mavis. Mavis is relying on me," Thomas said. Then Thomas heard a voice that gave him shivers. "Hoo ha 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 ha! I'm Timothy the Ghost Engine," Diesel said in a scary voice to Thomas. Thomas jumped with surprise. Who's there?" Thomas said nervously. "Well, Thomas, I'm Timothy the Ghost Engine. I'm your long-lost brother. Come on, let's haunt this island together once and for all," Diesel said in a scary voice. Thomas jumped with surprise, and Thomas began to feel very frightened indeed. "Also, too," Diesel said in a scary voice, "I'm gonna haunt you alive, and you'll never see your friends or your branch line ever again if you come with me to haunt the island of Sodor," Diesel said in a very scary voice. Thomas began to shiver. "Never! That's not going to happen to me. I'll always be Sir Topham Hatt's #1 engine. I gotta get out of here," as Thomas coupled up to the trucks and puffed as fast as his wheels could carry him. But what Thomas didn't know was that it was Diesel all along. Thomas still didn't know. However, on another part of the main line, Mavis was talking to Toby about the day's work. "Wow, today at the quarry was super busy today," Mavis said to Toby. "I have to agree with you, Mavis," said Toby, "but I'm glad I got to work with my coach Henrietta," Toby said to Mavis. Just then, the two engines heard a familiar whistle. "Is that Thomas?" Mavis said curiously. And it was. "Help! The ghost engine is after me!" Thomas said nervously, as Thomas crashed into Mavis and Toby. Luckily, no one had been hurt. Thomas, Toby, and Mavis's driver and fireman had all jumped clear, but the three engines were in a small derailment. "Oops," Sorry, Thomas said to Mavis and Toby. No, it's okay, Thomas. No harm done, said Mavis to Thomas. Say, Toby said, what made you go so fast like that along the main line? Toby said curiously to Thomas. Thomas took a huge puff. Well, you see, Mavis and Toby, James told me and Percy the story about Timothy the Ghost Engine. He looks like me, except he's silver with a 0 on his side, Thomas said to Mavis and Toby. I see, Toby said to Thomas. Just then, after Edward had finished taking some passengers for the day, he arrived to see what had happened. He was shocked. Oh no, what happened here? Said Edward. Just then, an idea flew into Edward's funnel. Don't worry, I'll go and get help, said Edward, as Edward chuffed on his way to go and collect the breakdown train. Soon, with the help of the breakdown train, Thomas, Toby, and Mavis were all back on the rails. And Sir Topham Hatt was there too. He was not too pleased. Thomas the Tank Engine, what happened here? You were going fast along the main line at a very high speed, and because of that, you caused a little confusion and delay, Sir Topham Hatt said to Thomas sternly. Thomas sighed. Sorry, sir. It's just, well, there was this ghost engine named Timothy who gave me a fright, and he said he would haunt me alive and take away my branch line and friends away from me, Thomas said nervously. Sir Topham Hatt was confused. Wait, Thomas, there's another engine that looks like you, named Timothy? Sir Topham Hatt said to Thomas in confusion. Well, yes and no. It was a story that James told me and Percy a few nights ago, sir, said Thomas to Sir Topham Hatt. Sir Topham Hatt cleared his throat. Well, Thomas, I do know that we have another engine named Timothy who works at the Sodor China Clay Works with Bill and Ben. However, Sir Topham Hatt paused impressively. I highly doubt there's another ghost engine that looks like you, Thomas, and that would make you puff like that fastly along the main line, Sir Topham Hatt said to Sir Topham Hatt said to Thomas. I know, sir, and I'm really sorry, sir, Thomas said to Sir Topham Hatt. Well, I understand your honesty, Thomas, Sir Topham Hatt said, and paused impressively. However, he raised his voice, what made you go like that so fast along the main line? Sir Topham Hatt said to Thomas. Just then, Thomas remembered who had gave him the fright. That devious Diesel, Thomas said. He gave me a fright, sir, Thomas said to Sir Topham Hatt. Sir Topham Hatt thought for a moment and agreed. So it was devious Diesel, huh? He had caused serious confusion and delay, Sir Topham Hatt said crossly. Soon after the mess was all cleared up and Thomas delivering the trucks to the quarry on his branch line, Diesel came into view. Everyone gave angry glares at him. Hi, guys, Diesel said. Nice evening, isn't it? Diesel said. Edward spoke up in defense. Don't you hi us, Diesel. We've heard about all the confusion and delay you've caused all evening, Edward said to Diesel. Diesel tried to make up a lie to get away with it. That fright? That wasn't me. That was Toby, Diesel said. I didn't give Thomas that fright, Diesel, Toby said in defense. That was you, Diesel. Now quit your lying and admit it, Toby said sternly. Diesel tried yet again to come up with another lie to get away with it. However, by then, he couldn't think of any more. Okay, fine. You got me. I just thought it would be nice to do a fright to Thomas, since it is Halloween, said Diesel. And Diesel also added, Thomas, I'm very sorry I scared you. Do you think you can forgive me? Diesel said to Thomas. Thomas's face went as red as Birdie the bus. You say you're sorry? Diesel, your apology is denied. You scared me. You threatened to take away my branch line and some of my friends, and your fright went way too far. Your apology is therefore denied, Thomas said crossly to Diesel. Sir Topham Hatt was most upset with Diesel. Diesel, you have caused serious confusion and delay tonight. And, as a punishment, Diesel, you aren't going to take part in the Halloween parties plus the Christmas parties in December this year. In addition, you are going to stay in your shed until you are wanted, Sir Topham Hatt scolded to Diesel severely. Diesel sighed. But sir, what will I do in my shed during that time? I love Christmas too, you know, Diesel said to all the other engines. As Mavis stood up for Sir Topham Hatt in defense. I know what you can do, Diesel, Mavis said. Just stop causing trouble, Mavis said. I agree with you, Mavis, said Toby. Ugh, fine, said Diesel, and with that, Diesel oiled away. Well, good riddance. At least now Diesel won't ruin the other Halloween parties, said Thomas. Edward smiled and agreed with Thomas. Agreed, Thomas, but let's just try and forget what Diesel did and enjoy this Halloween party, said Edward to his friend Thomas. And so, that night, after Diesel had gone, Thomas had brought his two coaches, Annie and Clarabelle, that were full of children decorated and dressed in their Halloween costumes. And in the end, it was a fun Halloween party indeed. But Thomas now learns never to believe in some silly, spooky urban legends. Or was it an urban legend? Do you think Thomas really saw Timothy? I wouldn't be so sure. Don't you?